Hello there, I'm Chameleon and welcome to my channel. This week I'm doing another short top 10 video, but with a twist. I had to order some more games to get footage for the next mini-series, but they're not going to be here until sometime this week, probably. So instead I'm doing this. If you've ever scanned through the various magic items in 5e looking for some treasure to give out to your players, you'll quickly notice that some types of weapons get way more representation than others. In general, if your player characters aren't using swords, then you're gonna have to search around a bit to find anything to give them. And this, I say, will not stand. In this video, I'm going to go over the top 10 most neglected types of magic items in D&D 5e. And for each of these weapons, I'm going to present you with a homebrew magic item of that type that I just came up with on the spot. You can either pause the video and grab a screenshot if you want to use them, or I'll compile a PDF of all the weapons I make up here and I'll put it on the DM's Guild for anyone to purchase if they want. The link to that product will be in the description. The way I did this was to go through the magic item list on D&D Beyond and filter them by weapon type. I counted the number of individual magic items available under each type of weapon and arranged them in order of least to most varied, with special points given for items that had a unique magic item. That is, a magic item that can only be that specific type of weapon. For example, a sunblade is always a longsword, and a javelin of lightning is, of course, a javelin. I know their system isn't perfect, so let me know down in the comments if there was something I missed. Also, just to let you know, I excluded firearms from this list since they're an optional rule, and some groups might not play with them. But if you're interested, they would be number 1 on this list if I included them. Since the Topaz Annihilator is not technically a musket, it just looks like one. But if you include the Annihilator anyway, then guns would tie with number 1 on the list, which is... The best of the worst is the Great Axe, with a total of 15 enchantment options, 4 of which are unique: the Blood Axe, Gert's Great Axe, Orc Splitter, and the Woodcutter's Axe. It was kind of surprising that this weapon made the list at all, since it's such an iconic weapon for barbarians. Although I suppose there's not a lot of other classes that would really choose a d12 damage die over the 2d6 of a greatsword. If you don't plan on playing a half-orc and or going far enough into the class to pick up brutal critical, there's not really much of a reason to choose this weapon, which may be why it just barely makes it on this list. I chose to play into this with my custom Great Axe, making it a weapon especially for barbarians. It gives a handful of amazing benefits for warriors of this class, but comes with a curse that could become a quest hook of its own. It's similar to the curse on the Berserker Axe, but with its own unique twist. Already we have a tie at number 9. There are 14 magic weapons that can be either a whip or a trident, with both weapons having 4 unique items. For the trident, we have Dikella, the Bident of Thassa, from Mythic Odysseys of Theros, the legendary weapons Drown and Wave, and the trident of Aquaman references. There are a surprising number of unique whips, also from Theros, as Mastix, the Whip of Erebos, the Lash of Shadows from Wildmount, the Symbiotic Tentacle Whip from Eberron, and the Mind Lash, which is technically only usable by Mind Flayers, but is included here anyway. Honestly, I kind of expected these weapons to be lower on the list, though I suppose their notoriety kind of worked in their favor here. For the whip and trident I created, I went with something a bit more defensive on the whip side. Honestly, I just got the idea from the Cat of Nine Tails and the idea that cats have 9 lives. For the trident, I decided to throw a bone to the net as well, considering it definitely needs the help. And because net and trident is an iconic gladiator thing, the improved base stats on the weapon is meant to make it at least slightly more appealing than just using a spear. We have 3 different weapons tied for the 8th spot, with 12 different enchantments and 2 uniques each: the Devotee's Censer and the Flail of Tiamat, Javelin of Backbiting and Javelin of Lightning, and the Iron Fang and Will of the Talon. The Flail and Warpick are both fairly mediocre weapons. They're just an admittedly solid D8 damage die, but no other properties or special features to set them apart from other weapons with more utility. The Javelin does have the advantage of greater range over the Spear and Trident, but it comes at the cost of being only a D6 weapon, and in most combat encounters, you're probably not going to need that extra 60 feet, so it's not hard to see why this gets neglected. The flail I created is really simple. In real life, the main benefit of a flail is that you can wrap it around a shield to hit a guy who's guarding, so that's what I went with. Really simple, but effective. The javelin is loosely based on the Geibulg, a weapon once wielded by Cuchulainn, and has a sort of temporary spike growth effect. For the war pick, I used a crow's beak as a base, and gave it reach, and also gave it a few evil-themed abilities to play off the association with ravens and death. Coming in just below the last spot, the Handaxe also has 12 possible enchantments, but there are no magic weapons that are exclusively Handaxes, so it ends up getting edged out. Despite it appearing in a few classes' starting equipment lists, the Handaxe is generally an unimpressive weapon. It weighs as much and does the same damage as a Javelin, but with inferior range, and it costs 10 times more coin to purchase. So unless you have some pressing need to do slashing damage instead of piercing, you're almost always better off using a Javelin instead. Pretty much the only advantage of a Handaxe is that it's a thrown weapon that can be dual-wielded, but if you're going that route, then you're probably going to pick up the dual-wielder feat anyway, so then why not just dual-wield Javelins? Well, for my version of a magic Handaxe, I went with just a +2 weapon with a unique power to set it apart. Obviously, it's based on the expression bury the hatchet. Only in Soviet Russia, hatchet bury you! From here on out, the number of total enchantments starts to hit a plateau, so it's really the number of unique enchantments that determines the next few spots on the list. There are 10 magic weapons that are capable of being a longbow, shortbow, morningstar, or sickle, and each of these weapons has a single unique item. The Oath Bow, Affixus, the Bow of Nylea, the Bloody End, and the Moon Sickle, respectively. The Morningstar is basically just a worse version of the War Pick, dealing the same amount and type of damage, but costing 3 times as much gold and weighing twice as much. The Sickle is likewise just a worse dagger. It costs half as much as the dagger, but weighs more, can't be thrown, and isn't a finesse weapon. For my homebrew Morningstar, I decided to go with a celestial theme, hence the divine Morningstar, Vesperus, because Morningstar. For the sickle, I decided to base it on a Kopish, which is occasionally called a sickle sword. I upgraded the damage die, gave it finesse, and gave it a desert-themed ability since it's an Egyptian weapon. The longbow and shortbow, by contrast, are both great weapons. The only reason they're at this spot on the list is because there's just so few enchantments for ranged weapons, which is why the majority of weapons from here on out will be in this category. For the shortbow, I decided to go with a Fey-themed weapon. I don't have any particular reason, just that I don't see very many Feywild magic items in 5e. For the longbow, I decided to go with something a little different. It's essentially like that one gun from Perfect Dark, the one that lets you shoot through walls. Just slightly less popular than the last spot on the list, lances are the last weapon with 11 enchantments but has 0 unique items. Which, honestly, is kind of surprising given how iconic it is to see knights on horseback with a lance. I suppose it speaks to just how bad the lance is mechanically. Who thought it would be a good idea to give this weapon, and only this weapon, disadvantage on attack rolls against adjacent targets? No other reach weapon has this property, so what gives? I mean, I guess it was an attempt to balance the d12 damage die, but this is just bad. All the enemy has to do is move up to you, and instantly you're forced to either draw an opportunity attack to move away, waste an action to disengage just for them to move up to you again, or make all of your attacks at disadvantage. What were they thinking? My homebrew version fixes this by simply removing this mechanic, as well as adding some additional abilities that make it a better choice than some of the more common weapons. Another triple threat. These weapons all have 10 enchantments, but only 1 unique each, the Seeker Dart, Hammer of Thunderbolts, and the Two-Bird Sling, respectively. The Dart and Sling both suffer from the scarcity of ranged weapon enchantments, obviously, but beyond that, they're both far outclassed by the other options available. Pretty much the only advantage of a Sling is that it's the only ranged weapon that doesn't deal piercing damage, which is great if you're fighting skeletons, but otherwise not so clutch. Darts are actually not that bad. They deal the same damage as daggers, but have a longer range and lower cost and weight. Probably the only thing that kills them is that A, you can't use them as a melee weapon, and B, even if you know what these things are actually supposed to be, throwing knives just present a cooler mental image than tossing an oversized arrow. I decided to go with more of a comedic take with my custom sling, but it's actually a pretty awesome concept if you're creative with it, if I do say so myself. As for the dart, I couldn't really think of anything amazing, so I just decided to do something simple, but effective for the classes that might want to use these. The lack of love for the Maul is less obvious. It's not a bad weapon by any means. It's basically a greatsword that deals bludgeoning damage, except it costs 1/5 as much while only weighing 4 pounds more. Honestly, it's probably just the rule of cool that strikes again. If you have a choice between 2 weapons that both deal 2d6 damage, most people are going to choose the Buster Sword over the Donkey Kong Mallet. Like the Sling, unless you're fighting some bony boys, there's really not much of a reason to choose the Maul over a greatsword unless you just really like smashing things. For my version of a magic Maul, I decided to take a weapon from 4th edition, the Mordenkrad, and use that as my base. In 4th edition, the Mordenkrad was basically a dwarven Maul that did 2d6 bludgeoning damage and had the Brutal 2 property, which let you reroll 1s and 2s on damage dice. It's the perfect weapon for a Forge Cleric. Oh boy, so this is by far the largest category of items, as we've reached the point at which the vast majority of enchantments are available on just any weapon. This spot on the list is shared equally by the blowgun, club, hand crossbow, light crossbow, heavy crossbow, light hammer, pike, quarterstaff, and the ikwa. Each of them has a total of 10 possible enchantments, and none of them has a unique enchantment. You'll see again that 5 of the 9 weapons at this spot are ranged, and thus mostly suffer from the lack of ranged enchantments. Crossbows are also lower on the list than bows because of the utter ass that is the loading property, despite the borderline brokenness of hand crossbows with the crossbow expert feat. The remaining weapons are just relatively mediocre. The club, light hammer, and pike are just not particularly interesting weapons. The quarterstaff is generally rendered useless by the fact that most staves for spellcasters can also be used as a magic quarterstaff, so you might as well just grab one of those. And the ikwa is actually a really good weapon. It's pretty much a D8 spear that you don't have to use in 2 hands, with the only downside being a shorter throwing range. I think the main problem here is that it's really only found in the Tomb of Annihilation module, so unless you're playing that adventure, you're most likely not going to come across one. Also, its name is pretty hard to pronounce if you don't speak Zulu. I watched a show once where they explained that it's named after the sound it makes when you yank it out of the dude you just stabbed. Anyway, for the magic items I made for this category, I'll just give a quick rundown since there's so many of them. The blowgun of the Hornet's Nest shoots a blow dart that turns into a swarm of bees! The War Club of the Unbroken is named after an orc fighter I played in 4E, hence the emphasis on warrior classes. The Assassin's Crossbow is loosely based on a similar weapon from Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, but also the Armbow, a Warforged weapon from previous editions of the Eberron campaign setting. The Bolt Shard Crossbow is a direct conversion of a weapon of the same name from 4E. Maybe that's cheating, but there are some minor differences. Van Richten's Crossbow was, again, me just riffing off the name of the weapon. Crossbow, holy bow, sure, why not an Exorcist's Crossbow? The Nail Biter is a simple upgrade with extra flavor ability added on top, seemed appropriate for a common magic item. The Pike of Blocking is obviously based on the strategy of a pike block, only with this weapon you can stop a cavalry charge all by yourself. The Staff of the White Lotus is designed to be particularly useful to the classes that are likely to wield staves, and are mostly defensive in nature. Finally, Shaka's Fury is designed to just be an overall good weapon with a focus on just being damn tough to take down. This is a very odd collection of items, each having only 9 possible enchantments with 0 unique weapons. On the one hand, you have the 2 of the most powerful weapons in the game as a result of the build-defining Polearm Master feat. On the other hand, you have the utterly useless garbage that is the net. In the case of the Glaive and Halberd, you could argue that they really don't need any unique magic items, as adding anything on top of Polearm Master would just push these 2 over the line from probably broken into silvery barbs territory. The Great Club, not so much. It's pretty much a worse version of the Flail because you have to use 2 hands. For those who might not know why the net is absolutely the worst weapon in the game despite not being number 1 on this list, let me break it down for you. The net is classified as a ranged weapon with a short range of 5 feet and a long range of 15 feet. In 5th edition, if you make an attack roll with a ranged weapon while an enemy is within 5 feet of you, you have disadvantage. If you make a ranged attack against the target beyond your weapon's short range, you have disadvantage. Ergo, you always have disadvantage on attack rolls with a net. Now you can cancel out disadvantage by getting advantage, and there's plenty of ways you can do that, but at best you're going to be rolling a straight d20. It's either disadvantage or nothing. Now if you actually manage to hit with the net, it doesn't do any damage, but it does have a pretty powerful effect. It restrains its target, immobilizing them and causing them to grant advantage to all attackers, as well as auto-failing dex saves. Sounds great, right? Well, yeah, it isn't bad, except that it's only a DC 10 strength check to break out and doesn't scale, or the enemy can just attack the net, which has an AC of 10 and only 5 hit points. Either of these things will destroy the net, so now you have to go buy a new one. So for my homebrew magic items in this category, I used a Naginata as the basis of my glaive, a Makwito for the great club, a scythe for the halberd, and for the net, just a net that doesn't suck. They all have fairly interesting abilities, I think. Hell's Corona is especially powerful as it's based on a weapon wielded by a character in my novel universe. Catch of the Day is designed to essentially just fix all the problems that a net have. You may have not expected this, but the absolute most neglected weapon type is the lowly Boomerang. Apart from firearms, it's the only weapon in the game to have only 8 possible enchantments, but it does have one unique item, the Storm Boomerang. Like the Iqua, the Boomerang is only found in one adventure module, this time Princes of the Apocalypse. Mechanically, it's a D4 ranged weapon that deals slashing damage with a range of 60 to 120. Its only real gimmick is that if you miss, it'll come back to your hand, which is arguably not that useful unless you intend to miss a lot. For my Boomerang, I based it on the eponymous weapon from Turok 2. Unfortunately, cutting off limbs is probably a bit gruesome for D&D, so I gave it a different ability instead. I also allow you to use it as a melee weapon, because honestly, if you're carrying a giant buzzsaw in your hand, why wouldn't you be able to hit someone with it? And finally, since it was a recurring theme throughout this list that ranged weapons have the lowest number of enchantments, I went ahead and made a bonus magic item. So here is an extra enchantment that can be applied to any ranged weapon or weapon with the thrown property. I realized after making it that it's actually way better for thrown weapons, since you can make melee attacks with it while you're waiting for it to reach full charge. Well, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed the items I came up with and consider adding them to your games. If you'd like to support me and have some cash to throw my way, I'm going to upload these to the DMs Guild. The link to that will be in the description. If not, you can just screen cap the video and print them out or something. I don't mind. Links to my other DMs Guild products and my other videos will be down there as well, so check those out if you feel like it. Until then, this is ChameleonX. Have a great day.